Hi everyone, this is Cody Smith. Welcome to my channel, Cody Smith Peer Support with Christ. Just want to let everyone know I'm working on chapter 6 of my book, The World of Disability, where I'm trying to show that the existence of disability points to the necessity of an intelligent mind to set a standard for human health so that we can know the difference between perfect human health and having a disability or a disease or being sick. Not to mention, I'm also showing how this requires, us to have done something to fall from perfection and begin to deteriorate, so that something like injuries, disabilities, and diseases and sicknesses and things like that, things that we consider bad or wrong, can begin to happen, can have an origin, like it says in the Bible with the fall of man through the disobedience in the Garden of Eden. I'm also showing how that requires that we need a standard setter, such as an all-powerful, all-knowing, loving God, as mentioned in the Bible, to set the standard for us before He makes us in the image and with the abilities and characteristics that we have to distinguish us from all other living creatures. And then we disobey Him, because if He made the universe, then every building needs a builder, and the builder will be the one to decide what the rules are for inhabiting that building and using it, and decide what its purpose is. And if we break the rules, then we deserve to be punished, just like a loving father gives a child the rules, but also gives the child the free will to either obey or disobey. And if you obey, you get rewarded. If you disobey, you get punished. And we were punished by deterioration, and that's what eventually led to things like disabilities. Even though our own personal disabilities, like mine, are not personally our fault, and it's not personally my fault. And perhaps, if God does exist and He knows the end from the beginning, and He would know the good that would come from me having my disability, ultimately in the long run, even if I don't, because I'm human and finite and have a limited amount of knowledge, can only see so far into the future, and I don't know everything, but He does, because He created everything and pre-existed everything. And I'm going into, this is why we need Him to come down to earth and die the most horrific death and save us from our sins, because if we sin against Him, then we owe Him repayment for that debt, for our wrongdoing. We owe Him, basically like if we hurt someone, we owe them an apology. Well, since we've wronged Him, we owe Him a debt, and He knows we can't pay it, and so do we, because no matter how much good we do, that does not erase the bad, because we continue to do bad, giving into our own free will. And then, that just increases the debt. So He chose to come down and suffer the death penalty through the most horrific death known to man, which is crucifixion. And then He rose again, which you could easily find evidence for, such as even the priests and Pharisees who were against Him, and a lot of different Jewish and Greek historians, such as Josephus and Tacitus, mention these things. Not to mention also the empty tomb, which was guarded and marked so it could easily be identified and found. And the fact that it was empty and no body was ever found, and the priest could not produce a body, tells us that he has to have risen from the dead after being crucified and killed. And in that time and culture, people would know when someone is dead because they would have to physically touch and handle the body so they could feel and be able to know, is someone still breathing, is their heart still beating, is their body cold, things like that, in order to wrap it up and bury it. And those are things that I look at that points to it. And I'm also looking through the history of the different translations of the Bible to show that the basic doctrine has not changed, even though maybe the wording has changed as it's gone through different languages and being translated from, say, Hebrew and Greek into Latin and Aramaic and German and eventually modern day English and different things like that. And those are things I'm putting in this chapter because I want people to realize we still have the same thing that they had back then. Even though we don't have the originals to compare them to, we can compare copies to each other and come back to the original, because all that's changed is the wording as the language itself has changed, not as the doctrines have changed, because the doctrines have not. And that is what I'm ultimately trying to get at. And this is why we need to surrender ourselves to Christ, because God doesn't want us to be separated from Him, because if He made us in His image with His qualities like the ability to speak, the ability to think, the ability to choose, the ability to create, and things like that, then, He considers us His children, and He doesn't want things like sin to take us away from Him. But He also gives us the ability and freedom to choose to obey and surrender to Him or not out of true love, because love does not force someone else to love them back. Love just says, look, I love you and I want you to love me back, but it's up to you to decide to love me back. And love is an action, and that is why God came down and lived a human life and never sinned, and died on the cross and rose again so that He could pay our debt that He knew we couldn't afford to pay, and allow us to avoid our rightful suffering for eternity by surrendering to Him and turning over our lives to Him and accepting His payment on our behalf. That is what I'm trying to get to in this book. And even though disability is a consequence, a form of suffering due to sin, it does not change our humanity or make us any less valuable, because we're all made in the exact same image by the exact same God, who wants us all to be with Him, but allows us to choose which way we want to go. Because He's not going to force us to do things His way. He's going to allow us to do things our way. And if we choose Him, good. If we don't, okay. He's not going to force it like putting a gun to somebody's head. He's going to say, here's what I want, but the choice is ultimately yours. That's how He works it out. And He uses every situation that we go through to help us learn about Him and hopefully bring us closer to Him and show us that we genuinely do need Him. That's what it's all about. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.